All right, let's talk about your book. Okay, so what's the difference? I'm just curious. What's the difference between like Catholic mindfulness and mindfulness? Is there a difference?
Yeah, definitely. So mindfulness itself is like a very sort of static, superficial sort of thing. It's just like it's a brain exercise of just learning how to focus and pay attention. You know,
Okay.
a simple way to understand mindfulness is just it's paying attention. It means
Okay.
having your senses, your mind, your ability to focus tuned in to what's really happening right now instead of being caught up in all the ruminations and thoughts when we're like lost in thought or and all this stuff. So we have like a natural colloquial way to understand this. We say like snap out of it, or we'll say come to your senses, or we'll say, even if we say like stop and smell the roses, like there are these phrases that have the sense of it. Now the difference between Catholic mindfulness and then there's a training program which is part of a Buddhist worldview and mentality, which is teaching people basically like mindfulness is a healthier state of mind. And the
Okay.
reason for that can be justified in a Buddhist way or a Catholic way.
Ah, okay. And
So,
I go to the mystics. Like I always think like, you have Saint Teresa of Avila quoted. Like that's when I think of mindfulness, I also like immediately want to go to the mystics of the church
yeah,
because they
so,
were,
yeah.
yeah,
It's, the mindfulness it's a really just, it's a brain exercise that like we all need.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
mystics realize and experience the presence of God in the present moment.
yeah.
So mindfulness is like, how do we train ourselves to be focused on the present moment? And it doesn't matter if you're focused on, the food that you're eating, the chair that you're sitting in, or your own breath and the sensation of your own breath. Whatever it is, it's the present moment. That's the gateway. That's sort of like the door. Once you go
Right.
through that gate, then you realize also ever present in every moment is the presence of God. So the only possibility to ever have communion with God in the present moment is if you have the ability to be focused on the present moment in the first place.
Hmm.
So it's like the
So
first
eliminate,
step.
yeah, so eliminate like all distractions because like now today, right, in our culture with so much information, we're like constantly inundated and always distracted, right? It's very hard to just be focused on one thing.
Exactly. And because of all those distractions, that the focus is kind of like a muscle, and the muscle atrophies over time because we're not practicing paying
Right.
attention to what's actually happening right now. Like I tell people, hold up your phone and now turn the phone over and look at the back side of your phone. Because,
Huh.
and if you spend just 60 seconds exploring what the back of your phone looks like, that's the first minute you've probably ever actually spent with your phone in your life. Even though your phone is such an integral part of your life, you're never with the actual phone. You're with all the other stuff that your phone is triggering you to think about through your senses. But the phone itself is actually an object you're holding in your hands. It has weight, it has dimension, it has texture, and you can sit with the present experience of that phone. But so just exercising focus in that way develops the focus muscle, which has atrophied because of technology and everything else in our frantic lives. And so that's the practice.
Um, okay, guys, so the book is called The Mindful Catholic. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, but one question that I really have, and a lot of us have, is so like, what's the first step, or what's something that we can do to stop or limit the wandering of the mind? Like,
Yeah,
what's
so
a good to start?
it's really good to tie in like new things that we want to start developing with things that we already do. So first I give people a prayer to pray. It's very simple. Ever present God, here with me now, help me be here with you. Ever present God, here with me now, help me to be here with you. And
Okay,
then
we'll post that later too, guys, so we'll have it. Okay.
good. And then I say, okay, what's like think about your morning routine, and what's something that you do every single morning that's just without even thinking about it, you do it. So for me, every morning I splash cold water on my face.
Okay.
So then it took a little bit of practice, but basically I forced myself to say that prayer in my head when I close my eyes and splash my face with the cold water. So every morning now when I do that, it's a trigger for me. So even if I'm not thinking about the prayer, when I feel the water, it reminds me. And then I say that prayer. So
Okay.
when we use exercises that are sort of like we're connecting to whatever is happening in the present moment. Some people do it brushing their teeth, whatever it, make your coffee. You tie in little exercises like that so that you're intentionally refocusing your mind on what's actually happening in that present moment. I add in the prayer piece because I think that's also really important to start the day with. And it's kind
Right.
of a 2-for-1 deal there. You're doing some
Right.
mindfulness exercise and you're starting in
Right.
prayer. And that's just a great way to get started.
One thing that I do, especially, with so many kids, and you get it, it's crazy. It's just like always so chaotic. Even if I try to plan or we have some type of routine, it always gets thrown off, right? Because there's just so many human bodies and things going on. One thing that does help me to be in the present moment is I just, like, as I'm changing a diaper, which that's probably not the best example, but I'll say, thank you, God. Or, God, I offer up this work to you. Or, I just consistently keep saying, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. And it at least like turns me to like at least that moment. But is that kind of when the saints, they're all talking about like live in the present moment, does that just probably means less thinking, right? And like be right where you are now.
Well, so I just think I differentiate between two kinds of thinking in the book. We talk about the being mind or the doing mind, or the automatic autopilot thinking versus present-minded thinking. And so that's actually, I mean, you're thinking in those prayers and those thoughts and that gratitude. Gratitude is very deeply integrated with mindfulness. You have to be mindful to be grateful. So, we're not, rumination is the opposite. That's the doing mind. So you could be changing that diaper and your mind is going off in all sorts of different directions. You're thinking about like, how long is this going to take? When's this kid
Yeah,
going to be out of
exactly.
diapers? Like
Is
all the
this
other
something
things I
that's
need to
loving
do.
another kid or something?
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have, but if you're turning your mind to God in gratitude, you're necessarily stepping out of that doing autopilot mind. And you're definitely reconnecting. So that's again, I mean, that's a beautiful example because it's mindful. So the brain exercise is happening. You're plugged into the present moment, and you're doing the best thing you could do with your mind at any given moment, which is turning it to God and also offering Him that praise and that in your gratitude. You're ultimately manifesting your awareness of His providence, and you're saying like, even if this is something that's uncomfortable to my senses, I can still turn this into something beautiful. So your intention for the week to turn suffering into joy, like that could be our disposition at every single moment, regardless of the situation. And it's always that worship. It's always that submission of self. Like, and you said diapers. I don't know if it's really that uncomfortable for you or not, but like anything that's uncomfortable,
Right.
whether it's joyful and
Right.
comfortable or not comfortable, gratitude is necessarily that act of submission and worship. And so that's like the best thing we could do with that present-minded awareness.
Okay, so how do we change the negative thinking or the constant thinking? Like how do we I guess you kind of said it right, the splashing of the water first thing in the morning. And then do you kind of have like check-ins throughout the day?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So one exercise I help people do is you go through and you figure out, like, we distinguish like depleting depleting activities from nourishing activities. And then you write out a list, you take an audit of your whole day, figure out what the most depleting aspects of your day are. And then you figure out how to use those moments to engage all of your senses. And so then instead of it being a depleting activity, it ends up becoming a nourishing activity. So you do this like jujitsu move on the thing, or where
Yeah.
you use the force of that moment in the negative and you turn it into something good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if changing diapers was your like hardest part of your day, then
Right.
you look at your list, you look down on your audit, and you say like, okay, these moments are happening throughout the day. It happens frequently, so that's a great example. And then you
Yeah.
say like, okay, so what part of changing diapers? just the sound of the Velcro, snapping, or,
Right.
whatever. And you
Right.
say, okay, I'm gonna make intentionally tune into that moment and
Wow.
replug in, recheck in, so that I'm actually living in that moment throughout the day.
Right. Wow. Okay, so what about some of us that, you have to go to work and you have to write a presentation or you have to analyze something or maybe you have to go shopping for your family. How about work? Like how,
Yeah. So the craziest thing about all this stuff is that our brains, when we're in that doing mind, when we're in that autopilot thinking, it's actually the fight or flight or freeze sensation of the mind. It's called the sympathetic nervous response. And it's when our brains are made by God to save our lives. And we end up living in that state of mind most of the day. Now, the thing about the sympathetic nervous response and that fight or flight response is that it's not the most efficient, best way to live our lives. It's a survival instinct. And when we need to survive, we just need to survive. We don't need to, you know, get out of the building in the best way possible. We just need to
right?
get out of the burning building to not die. So
Yeah.
when you're thinking about grocery shopping or working, preparing a presentation, whatever it is, if we're in that mindset, we are severely limiting our scope of our brain and our creativity and our thinking outside the box and our awareness of every aspect of what we need to do. When we step back into a mindful being state of mind, we're essentially believing that we're safe at the core level, which, going back to the Catholic difference, it's because we believe that we have a God who loves us, who takes care of
Right.
everything. We literally have nothing to worry about. That's why we can do mindfulness. And then we're not in fight or flight mode. And that means that we're actually using more of our brains. We are more creative. All the studies show this. It's amazing the data that comes out of this. But we're more efficient, more productive, and more creative. So if you have a presentation to do, you're going to do it better and prepare for it better by doing it mindfully. If you have grocery shop, how many times do you go grocery shopping or preparing a presentation or doing any of these
Right.
things, you're scrambling to get something done because you're so frantic, and then you get
Yes.
home and you're like, oh gosh, why did I forget XYZ? Now I got to go
Yes.
back. Or,
Yes.
I was giving a talk a couple weeks ago, and it was like the next morning I got into like a ruminative, the temptation is always there for all of us, no matter how much we practice. And it's like, oh,
Right.
if only I did this, if I said this story in this talk, if I did this instead. And then I was like, well, if I don't stop this right now and plug back in, I'm going to mess up my preparation for my next workshop that I have to give in an hour. So,
Right.
like,
Right.
doing everything mindfully makes everything better.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. There's also this book called It's Like Deep Work. And my sister and I talk about this a lot because it's so hard to actually do deep work because now we're just constantly interrupted, like all the
Mm.
time, right? It's phone call, text message, or even this happens all the time. I'm going into my phone knowing I have to respond to one text message, but then something else pops up, 10 minutes goes by, and I'm like, what? I totally didn't even do the thing I wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, can we be more mindful in our phones?
Yes. Oh, this is something that's a little challenging and somewhat,
Yeah.
it's a little bit controversial here when I say this, but everybody's like anti-multitasking, and it's definitely like I'm going to tell you like this is like advanced mindfulness practice.
Guys, we've
But
already made it to advance.
but there's definitely a need to like simplify and slow down and focus on one thing at a time, and like that's what we need to do because our focus muscles have so atrophied. We need to practice this stuff in simple ways. But there's also the reality that we can be more efficient and more productive, and not for sometimes that means doing a bunch of things at once. It's never like at the same time, but there might be many switches that are happening in the matter of
Yeah.
seconds. But if you're practiced and have developed this mindfulness muscle, you can be in control of the switching.
Mm.
And when you're
Mm-hmm.
in control of the switching is not happening because of this autopilot, mindless urge you're putting out fires. but you're being very directive and saying like, okay, I'm going to check Instagram, checked it. Now I'm going to go back to the email, checked it.
Intentional,
Now,
right?
and it's
Very
all
intentional.
intentional.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't go like black and white on almost anything when it comes to like the brain and practices and stuff like this. So I would say like, yes, we do need to practice sort of like a focused singular activity to get good at what this feels like.
Right.
But then the best thing is we get to go back to the world that we actually live in, and whether it's our phone or, you know, taking care of a household or managing a bunch of kids or whatever it is, it's like look at you. This is something that people say all the time. Like with having a bunch of kids, you're like, oh, throw in the towel. You might as well give up on any sense of peace, right? Because that it requires multitasking.
It requires a lot of multitasking. Yeah.
So
and
you don't have to throw in the towel. You actually can do it intentionally.
Yep. Yep. It's true. Okay, so like what's one thing that we could do today to be more mindful? Is it just to be more aware of it and cognizant of it when like the thoughts start going to like stop ourselves?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that I tell people to do, and they're challenging, but number one would just be to find what that first morning activity is and do that and build a routine into with that prayer. Second of all is to, like right now, choose a time that you're going to have today to do 10 minutes of absolutely nothing.
Yes.
And the only way that you can know that you're doing it is if you feel like you're wasting your time. So you have to find 10 minutes today to feel like you're wasting your 10 minutes.
I love it.
And just like practically, psychologically, like that's the only way to know that you're actually doing it right, is that you should feel like you're wasting your time. And then to be aware of like what that's like for you. Hey, little buddy, who's that?
This is Johnny. This is Johnny.
That's awesome. So yeah, we have, you know, all the thoughts that will come up in that process, all the feelings, like we're going to have all sorts of reactions to wasting time and for those 10 minutes. And just starting to pay attention to like what's happening internally is getting us a little bit closer to living this kind of more intentional and aware life.
Right. I love this so much, and I just think all of us need it and are searching, and because I hear from so many that, you know, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, they're lost, and I think it's just there's just so much information and data now. We're going so fast and we're all so busy. And you're exactly right. Like just take 10 minutes today and just sit, do nothing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to want to have you back.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I love starting my day off like this. This is awesome.
That's like, so that's literally how this kind of was created, is that my sister and I, we started these virtual rosary groups. And it was just administering them. It was a lot. And then for last October, we just didn't want to do like put our faces out there like with the live, but we felt the nudge and we wanted to start our day in prayer. And it's hard to do it alone because I'd wake up and then like he would hear me and come down, whereas at least now he'll like sit here and has to just kind of listen to us.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But, it's been really wonderful, and the community's amazing.
That's really beautiful. That's really such an awesome inspiration. I love it, and I'm happy to join in and support however I can. So just let me know.
Love it. Thanks, Dr. Greg. Okay, so like my kids took the cover off, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the Mindful Catholic, guys, and I'll make sure I post it. And I noticed that the price on Amazon was down, right?
Yeah, I don't know how any of this stuff works, but I just saw that, and I yesterday I was checking, and I was like, wait a minute, it's only $10.